Let's go back in time to 1932 as Converse brings you historic footage of the legendary original Celtics, with whom all great professional teams are compared.
We have now taken over your radio.
Richie Guerin is about to show you the most important step in getting past a man. It's the first one.
And Oscar will inbound it. The men in green, the Milwaukee Bucks, that's Alcindor against Bellamy.
It has Jordan. Allen shakes free, gets two!
Gilmore on
Stop! Brother.
lead Toledo artists. You get 21.
4:28 to go in the first quarter for the Cow Palace. Here's Barry.
Jordan. Open. Chicago with the lead.
Hello, and welcome back to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason Mann, and with me as always is Rich Craich. Rich, glad to be back with you.
Absolutely. How are you?
I'm doing well. You know, I'm excited for another podcast. This is our 12th podcast.
Indeed. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, thanks everyone who has been checking us out, giving us feedback, and otherwise saying nice things about us. We definitely appreciate it. And today we are going to talk about Jason Williams, White Chocolate, as he was known, who was quite the rookie sensation for the Kings back in the lockout season of 1999 for his flash and his playmaking. I know for you he was definitely I don't know, is influence the right word, or definitely
yeah. No, I think influence is the right word. I mean, that's, you know, and I believe my friend will be listening to this podcast because I told him I'm doing a Jason Williams podcast, and he was very excited about this. But him and I, we both started kind of watching the NBA around the same time. And he was a guy that we just immediately were gravitated to because it was just so shocking to see what he could do and the creative stuff he could do. And it was perfect for watching videos and then going to like our YMCA or going to his driveway and practicing this stuff, because it was just insane. And it came out around the same time as we're still in this sort of and one generation where we're watching, you know, the and one mixtapes, and you have Hot Sauce and Skip to My Lou or whatever. And it's a similar stuff. And then you see a guy in the NBA doing this stuff. And that was always our biggest thing, is like, yeah, you can do this while you're in the park and no one's playing defense and all that sort of stuff, but try it in the NBA. I mean, you know, try it when guys are guarding you. And this guy did. And that was always an inspiration in a lot of ways. And I think it still does. I still think the way I pass is a lot, because when I was learning the game, I was looking at tapes of him and then trying to emulate it. I mean, I try the elbow pass unsuccessfully. It never really works in games. I don't do it in that, but I do a lot of the other stuff. I mean, like the between the legs passes he does. There's one where he does a crossover and spins and throws it, you know, to the baseline. I do that one every so often. The way I sort of move my head as I pass is a lot of it was influenced by Jason Williams. And I still, to this day, I played this morning, and there was things that I did that I think I can attribute to watching Jason Williams as a kid who's, you know, a young, you know, impressionable child watching the NBA. I mean, I thankfully play a little bit better defense, but yeah, no, just definitely, I think influence is the right word. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, he really was a phenomenon. I mean, particularly that first year with the Kings, who were much improved after years of being a really bad team. They, you know, were kind of up and on the rise. It seems to me, now I wasn't really following basketball closely in '99, but it seems to me that sort of his phenomenon had a lot of similarities to Linsanity a couple of years ago. And both of those, of course, are sort of fueled by players going against, like, you know, stereotypes or notions of, you know, how somebody of their race plays, you know, or somebody from their background plays. I mean, I don't know. Do you feel like that is a fair comparison?
Oh, certainly, yeah, and the Linsanity thing, that was obvious at the time, and maybe less so. You know, kind of we were living in that, so we know that. As far as the you know, the Jason Williams sensation, I think so as well, because when you read a lot of the articles, one of the leads or something that's brought up really quick is he's doing stuff that, you know, white guys shouldn't do, or, you know, and then that's not really. I mean, it's a very big generalization, because obviously we have Pete Maravich, we have, you know, Bob Cousy is the, you know, inventor of the behind the back pass, and there's a bunch of other guys that have done similar things to that, but it still was that phenomenon of, like, here's this guy, and the way he talked as well was very, you know, it wasn't, he kind of had a twang to his voice, and there was something just very different about him, and yeah, I mean, it was kind of the fact that you were the flashiest guy in the court was a white guy, and that to a lot of people was interesting, and that was the Linsanity thing too, is that there was, oh my God, there's, you know, this Asian guy, and he's one of the best players on the court.
Yeah, and he's from Harvard too. Yeah,
right, exactly. Yeah. Oh, that was a big part of the narrative too. Is that it's a smart Asian guy or whatever, and whether right or wrong. I mean, obviously there's generalizations and there's kind of prejudices that go evolve with that, but. The Jason Williams stuff, yeah, I think it was a phenomenon because, and we'll talk about it later, his jersey sold like crazy, and I don't think if it was just and that I don't mean that to be racist or anything, but let's be honest, if he was just a black guy doing that sort of stuff, I don't know if his jersey would have been the number one selling, but it was the fact that it was different and unique and weird or whatever. I don't think that's wrong. I think that's absolutely what fueled a lot of the sensation at the beginning.
I mean, I will say that he was flashy for a player, black or white. I mean, he really was.
Oh no, I agree.
I mean, the way he played was novel. It wasn't like he played like every your average black point guard at the time or anything like that. I mean, he was, for anybody, he was playing it just at a completely different way. I wouldn't say quite a different level because his play wasn't really actually that strong as you will look into when we look at the numbers a bit, but certainly just, stylistically, he was on a different level than just about anybody playing at the time. And, I would say he had some difficulty sort of living up to the attention that he got from there. He was involved with some controversies, engaging with fans, cursing at them. There's one time where he used a racial slur. He also had a marijuana suspension, which kind of followed up from some that he had in college. As he moved on to Memphis and Miami Heat, he kind of became more. He seemed to mature, at least in how he acted on and off the court. Became an unlikely pair with Hubie Brown, helped lead them to their first success, the Memphis Grizzlies. Then became an NBA champion with the Miami Heat, and we've won. Last strong year in Orlando, he actually retired and then came back and played 1 year for Orlando, and then had another year splitting between the Magic and Grizzlies to end his career. But yeah, I mean, he just had some of the most incredible highlight plays. I mean,
oh, certainly.
Stuff like throwing alley-oops from behind midcourt, behind the back off of one hand, and then the elbow pass to a teammate on a fast break. Behind the back near the three-point line, pass a defender to a teammate who hits a layup in stride. A bounce pass from midcourt between two defenders to a teammate who hits his layup in stride. Just stuff like that. I mean,
I had to watch that one. I was watching that earlier, and I had to rewind that one like twice. I'm like, how does nobody just get a hand up? And it's just perfect. It's like unbelievable. I mean, and it is from one end of the court to the other, and it's unbelievable how perfect it was.
Yeah, and there are obviously there are many point guards who have done some of this stuff and who would just make these incredible highlight plays, not just point guards, somebody like Larry Bird or just lots of players who have that court vision, but he just had, I think he combined that with just an attitude and a look, and he was this skinny guy who didn't look like he was really any threat to do anything on the court, and he was just doing these just this flashy fascinating stuff, and it definitely made him interesting, made his team interesting for the helped make his team interesting for the first time in a long time. There were other points as well, but yeah, he maybe not necessarily a great career, but definitely an interesting career, and was a colorful character, and definitely a guy worth examining.
Certainly, yeah. I'm definitely looking forward to looking, a little bit, because we've mentioned before that those Kings teams were just super fascinating, and the rise to power for them, and just kind of the national sensation they became. And I think a lot of that was, obviously their biggest success came later with, Mike Bibby instead of Jason Williams, but I think he was a big part of putting them on the map because he just added another element of character. I mean, that more than anything, I mean, they were a great basketball team, but there was just so many interesting characters on there. I mean, you have Vlade and Peja, and Rick Adelman was a character into himself, and him and Jason Williams obviously couldn't have been more opposites, and we'll find out sort of how that happened as well. But just a super fascinating career. Yeah, maybe not a great career, but one that's definitely going to be interesting to sort of talk about.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk with one of the bosses here at Hardwood Paroxsym, Jared Dubin. We're going to he's a big J. Will fan as well. I can't believe I called him J. Will instead of White Chocolate. How dare I?
It's okay. No, they're interchangeable.
Okay.
They're okay.
All right, fair enough. All right, it's short.
I call him J. Will. So I still to this day call him J. Will.
It is shorter, so that has that compete. I'm not really a big fan of the first initial, first part of last
he was
name
one of the first. He was one of the first though. I'll let him slide. Yeah, because it's gotten ridiculous. ridiculous now, but he's one of the patriarchs. He and
T-Mac are probably okay, but
right. T-Mac is absolutely acceptable. As
well. but those generally are not my favorite nicknames. But anyway,
no, they've gotten really old and bad.
So we're gonna we're gonna take a little break. We're gonna talk with Jared for a little while, and come on
Oh boy! That doesn't give you goose pimples. Nothing will. And that is one of the great passes of the young NBA career from Jason Williams.
Rodney Rogers, his pass is stolen away, and it's Williams again. Working on Chapman behind the back of Beauty. Phenomenal pass to Weber.
Another ooh and an ah, and a how about that?
Starts his move, lost the handle, pops it up right to Jason Williams. Williams crosses over, loses Gary, drives into the lane, arcs the high without the window, up and in. What a move by Jason Williams. What I'm seeing right here is a guy that's not afraid to play against anybody.
All right, we're back here on the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. We're joined by a very special guest, a guy who basically demanded that we put him on here. I think we Jason, I don't recall the exact thing. I know that you said, who was the other player that you recommended us?
It was going to be Penny Hardaway.
Okay, so you said we can either do Penny Hardaway or Jason Williams, and this guy immediately said, it's Jason Williams, and I'm coming on right now. Is essentially the basically what it was. We had Jared Dubin on here. You can find him on Grantland, the Cauldron, Bleacher Report, obviously the Hardwood Paroxsym family, Hoop Chalk, a bunch of other stuff. You can follow him on Twitter at JADubin5. Jared, how are you?
I'm doing well, guys. Thanks for having me. And I got to say, even if you had done Penny Hardaway, I would have demanded to come on that podcast too.
Well, why were you so – so you just want to come on regardless. It's not just because
it actually was just those two players are two players that I'm very, very passionate about.
All right,
Penny was my favorite player growing up when I was a kid. Even though he wasn't on the Knicks, Penny was my favorite player. I had those 1 cent shoes, obviously, and then just white chocolate. I mean, we'll talk enough about him. I don't think I'll have to explain by the end of the podcast why I liked him so much. But the two players that you guys threw out there, I was like, oh, my God, this is my podcast.
Well, we're glad you took the choice. We'll do Penny Hardaway down the line because he's a guy I very much want to talk about as well. So we'll have to have you back for that. If we're going to talk about some controversial things, I think, over the next few minutes. So if the rancor doesn't get too bitter, at the end of it, then I think we'll have you back. We'll have to see how that goes. But so yeah, I mean. He really was I honestly 1999. I was not really following the NBA closely. I've been on and off fan for the past 20, 25 years, but that was definitely just kind of maybe the year in which I was following it the least. So really, the whole Jason Williams sensation was kind of something I had to kind of look back on and realize what a sensation he was his rookie year. Just when you first saw this guy, if you remember that, or when he first kind of became that famous, that lockout year 1999. What did you think of him?
Sure. Well, obviously that was the lockout year, so everything that happened in that season was so strange. It was so condensed. They played 50 games in 4 months. It was crazy. If you think that 66-game season a couple of years ago was nuts, try playing 50 games in half the time. It was really, really weird. And I mean, to have this guy this little white dude with he had an Iverson type attitude to him on the court. And that's sort of what drew me to him at first. As a kid, I always loved the very angry players in every sport. My parents would tell you that's because I was one of those players in every sport. I loved Randy Moss. I loved Terrell Owens. I loved Michael Irvin. I loved Keyshawn Johnson. Those were my favorite football players. And in basketball, it was Iverson. I loved Jason Williams. I was 11 and 12 years old in his rookie season. So this was the time that I was really falling in love with basketball. I had obviously started to like it and love it before that. The Knicks went to the finals when I was 7, and then I went to the All-Star game for the NBA's 50th anniversary 2 years later. And then, now I'm in prime time. I'm in middle school, going to bar mitzvahs and buying myself every jersey imaginable. And this guy just captivated me so much because of his attitude and just the things that he could see on the court that nobody else could, it just was, mind-boggling to me.
I think that's interesting you said your age, because it's similar to me, the age I was when I first saw Jason Williams in 1999, and more in like 2000 to 2001 is where I really became a big fan. How much, because I know this was one of my big things, we'll talk about it here on the podcast as well, of he was a guy that when I watched him, and especially at that age, I'm trying to find guys and that I love and guys to sort of emulate. He was the guy that I remember my friends and I would download, videos on Kazaa or LimeWire or whatever the hell the horrible like file share system was there, and get like 200 by 200 horrible low res and watch some of these plays and then go out to his driveway and do them. Did you ever get influenced by Jason? Was there, like, when you went out and played, did you try this stuff that he did, like the passes between the legs, the elbow pass, that sort of stuff? Did he influence you at all in the way you played?
I still, to this day, every time I play pickup with my friends, when one of them is shooting and I am rebounding, if they make it, the first time they make it, I will throw it back to them with an elbow pass every single time.
I'm right with you. I miss it more times than not, but it's okay.
I've actually gotten
I used to be a lot better at it
because I've done it so many times. Like, I would, practice in my driveway with my brother. Like, I would, we had a hoop in the driveway, and I would drive towards the basket and then try to do the elbow pass. I mean, I was very, very, very not good at it back in the day. But now I say I hit it like 75, 80% of the time.
That's impressive. So do you have, obviously the elbow pass is one of like the calling cards, but is there like are there any specific highlight plays that like stand out to you as just ones that, are favorites, or ones that, blew you away at the time?
Yeah, I can't remember what team it was against, but he was on a fast break and he looked like he was going to do a behind the back pass, but he dribbled it and it went all the way around his body and through his other leg back to his same hand. I think it might have been against the Lakers. So he's streaking down like the right side of the court with, I think it was Doug Christie on the left on a 2-on-1. And he fakes like he's going for a behind the back pass, but instead of that, he wraps it all the way around. And it literally goes around his back and then through his leg in the front of his body, and he puts up a one-handed layup. That's the thing that stands out, other than the elbow pass, to me the most.
One thing that's a little fascinating about Jason Williams, and probably the most, where you get a guy that obviously he comes in the league, and as we're mentioning here, he's a sensation. He's flashy. You're mentioning plays. Everybody's got, there's the elbow pass, and everyone's got their kind of favorite Jason Williams stuff. I know earlier today I was just watching highlight videos, and my jaw was dropping at some of the stuff he could do, going back and looking at that. But what's kind of funny is a lot of fans, if they know him sort of recently or came in, maybe they didn't watch in the early 2000s, maybe jumped in the mid 2000s. Jason Williams was still around, but it was not the same guy at all. I mean, you talk about the reliable sort of point guard for the Heat. Very, it still had elements of the flash, but not as much. Can you kind of describe a little bit of, obviously as you grew up as a fan, he sort of seemed to grow up as a player in a sense, correct?
Somewhat. One thing that struck me, I looked over his basketball reference page, while I was getting ready to jump on with you guys. He was much worse in terms of like his impact and his actual quality of play than I remember. Like in an objective sense, like he shot under 40% from the field for his career and under 33% from three. That's very poor numbers. He was a bit of a phenomenon, and he came along right at the right era where, you were still able to be like an outrageously celebratory player on the court. And he was just so good at it, and so good at making plays that shouldn't have been able to be made, and doing it by being fancy, that it made him seem like he was a better player than he actually was. And then, sort of as he grew up, he became... I guess he was just less flashy about it because he wasn't as quick with anything, whether it was his dribble or his passing or anything like that. But I don't think he ever really got more solid and dependable in terms of the quality of his play. He just didn't do as much fancy stuff as he got older.
Yeah, he may have shot a little better here and there and turned the ball over a little bit less. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good point. I mean, the phenomenon reminds me a little bit of Linsanity as far as just the hype exceeding the actual play. I mean, I guess for a while Lynn was playing really exceptionally well, but it is interesting how I mean, that does feel like, a pretty similar phenomenon to me.
Yeah, I think that there are some similarities, and I think you also have to remember, the white point guards he was being compared to at the time when he came into the league were guys like John Stockton, who was about as different stylistically from Williams as you could possibly get, specifically in terms of, like the way they ran, not necessarily ran the offense, but the way they, got the ball where it needed to be offensively. Even though they were both running a ton of pick and rolls, Stockton and Malone were the reason that you couldn't stop them was because they were so precise and so practiced and knew exactly where the other one was going to be without looking or feeling or thinking or anything. And Williams was almost the exact opposite. The reason that the Kings were so tough to stop when he was out there was because you absolutely never knew what he was going to do. And he could come around a screen, and, I mean, the ball would just, before you could even think to try to put your hands up, it was already in C-Webb's hands, and he was dunking it. I mean, so the hype was, I think, a lot of it was just because the things he was doing were things that nobody would ever think to do.
One thing that I had a kind of a question about for Jason Williams, and obviously you sort of answered it a little bit at the beginning when you talked about the influence that he had, and I talked about the influence he had for me. Do you think he had a cultural impact on, maybe not as a whole in the national spectrum, but possibly for like young white children? You know what I mean? Where there's sort of this idea that like there's point guards like John Stockton and there's guys like that are super fundamental and super that. Where then you have a guy, he's a little white guy and he comes in there and he's doing stuff that just blows people's mind, and he's stylistically different than what you would sort of get. And this is a generalization, for a lot of ways, but you get a little bit of a Pete Maravich style there. Do you think Jason Williams had any sort of cultural impact on, obviously you and I were impacted by him, but do you think it's larger than that?
I don't know. I know he definitely impacted me and my friends and the way that we played, even beyond, that period of 5 or 6 years when he, in addition to being sort of I don't necessarily want to go to the level of phenomenon, but, there was a lot of attention paid to him. Even beyond that 5 or 6 year period, he still impacted the way my friends and I were playing all the time. And we would, even when we were playing like 2-on-2 or something like that, we would try to do like Jason Williams type stuff. And I don't think necessarily that impact, was limited to suburban white kids. Obviously, I did live in the suburbs, but, not all of my friends were white. And, even, my friend who, he eventually wound up being the center on our high school team. He grew to be, 6'6", and then he wound up playing college football. But, he would try to do white chocolate stuff too. It was not necessarily limited to white kids. But I do think, if you look at a guy like Ricky Rubio, even if he wouldn't say the influence is directly there, I think in just the way he attacks things offensively, where when he sees a passing lane that you shouldn't be able to get the ball there, the way he gets it there is by making some crazy pass that you would never think of to make. So I think that that's sort of the logical extension of the way Williams played, even if Rubio doesn't necessarily, attribute it to that, or maybe even have watched that when he was growing up.
So we have a few Twitter questions that are interesting from our followers on Twitter and probably listeners. First from Stingy at AIGHT. I have a hard time saying it, but anyway, is the elbow pass the most creative pass in basketball history?
Oof, I mean, in basketball history,
that's big.
I mean, probably, but you could make arguments for any number of others. Like I can't remember who it was, but I remember someone, catching the ball off a free throw and then making like a bowling ball pass down the court with like spin on it, and it spun around like three guys and hit a guy on a fast break. I can't remember who made the pass, but I mean, I remember that being just as creative as the elbow pass. But I feel like other guys could have done that, and nobody else would have ever thought to do the elbow thing like Jay Will did.
Yeah, and like a guy like Bob Cousy, maybe not inventing, but popularizing behind the back passes, that kind of thing.
Right.
Different time period, but the first guy who thought of the behind the back pass, might get some props as well.
Or you know what? Another nominee. I remember Mark Jackson when he was on the Raptors. Was doing his, back down, starting at half court, all the way down to the baseline nonsense that he used to do. And then he took two dribbles into the middle of the paint, and while facing completely the opposite way, threw the ball with two hands over his head backwards to, I think, one of the Davis brothers for a dunk under the basket. That was preposterous. I remember seeing that and just being like, that's not a human thing that people can do.
One of my favorite, actually, it's interesting. I don't know if it'd be the most creative, and I don't know if what your thoughts are. If you remember this one, actually, was one that Jay Will did that I remember just loving. Was he did it? He faked a crossover and then chucked it to the basically the baseline where I think Weber was down there, but then spun around as he did it just to give him like this insane amount of momentum. But it froze everybody because everybody thinks he's going between his legs to do a crossover, and instead he just whips it down and it just rifles between like three guys and goes, and like I think Weber didn't even know it was going to go to him either, because you could see sort of his shock, and then he like immediately just dunks it in or whatever. And that's one that I still to this day still use, because it's super, like, nobody sees it coming because they don't expect you to pass it in that situation where the elbow pass was kind of, it's a fast break, and it's I mean, knowing him, and if you watch there's a video on YouTube that I put out to our Twitter file that said it's of that All-Star game where he does this elbow pass, and it's called Jason Williams is incapable of like throwing a chest pass, because they just show every clip of the game and he just will not throw a normal pass. Like, even if the guy's like right next to him or it's like an inbound, he goes behind the back. Like, he just would refuse to do it. But that's one that always kind of stood into my mind as being super creative.
Oh, I agree with you, and I'm pretty sure like right after that he makes like some crazy looking face.
Oh, he knows it too. He just chucks it, and then he just turns to the crowd and starts screaming, because he's just like, hell yeah, like, I just did that.
Like, I remember watching that highlight, and I think that that pass specifically goes back to what I talked about before. The reason that, not necessarily the reason they were so tough to stop, but the reason that he made them even tougher to stop was because you never could get a read on what he was going to do, because he just did things that didn't make sense and nobody else would ever think of to do.
Well, that sort of transitions into a question from Adam Kriblitz. The Kings were more exciting with Williams than Bibby, but were they better?
I think no. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they were more efficient offensively after the trade. I think on a single possession, they were better with Williams, but throughout the course of a game and a season, it was tougher to stop them, and they were a better team with Bibby, is the answer I'll go with.
Yeah.
Because in a single possession, there was so much variance with Williams that, you could come out with a possession that was just literally impossible to stop.
Yeah, and to bear that out a little bit, in Williams' last season there, they were 55-27 and were swept by the Lakers in the second round. The following season, 2002, they won 60-plus games and made it to the conference finals and almost beat the Lakers. Were the closest team to beating the Lakers in that, that three-peat they had in the early 2000s. So I think I agree that probably Bibby was just, maybe a little bit better of taking care of the ball, maybe a little bit better at, of an outside shooter as well, probably, kind of fit what they were going for better than Williams ended up doing. I don't know. What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, I agree. And just to clarify as well, you mentioned the offensive efficiency. I think it was they went from they were the year prior. I got to fire it up. The year when Bibby came in, they were 109, so it was third in the league on offensive efficiency, and then they were 105.6 the last year with Williams. So definitely it helped there. I mean, there could have been other factors, but yeah, I agree. And I remember that at the time, that was sort of what everybody kind of assumed, and a lot of it wasn't because of. And we're going to talk a little bit, later in this when I do some advanced stat stuff. A lot of it wasn't necessarily the turnovers as much as it was he took dumb shots and he took bad shots and wasn't good at those shots. And that I think was the big difference with Bibby, and especially if you look at the seasons with Bibby, he was the guy they went down to, in the stretch to, game-winning buckets and stuff when it wasn't Chris Webber or, sometimes, Peja. A lot of times it was Bibby, and you just could not trust Jason Williams in that sort of situation. So I think that had a lot more to do with the kind of the turnover. So yeah, I think that they were, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, they were way more successful with Bibby than Williams, but yeah, it is kind of interesting. I mean, certainly more exciting, and there's other factors, but yeah, I would almost say they were better with Bibby than with Williams, but not as big of a difference, really.
Yeah, I mean, they were.
Yeah, I'm with you guys on that one.
Yeah. So Ben Swanson at Cardboard Gerald asks, how disappointed was he? And I can extrapolate, are we, that they did nickname jerseys after he retired?
Oh my God. That would have been incredible.
Oh. The highest seller, no doubt. Yeah.
The only issue, I guess, is getting white chocolate on the back of the jersey. That's a mouthful.
I don't think they would have let him do. They would have let him do. Actually, back then,
it would have been J. Will.
Back then, they would have let him do white chocolate. These days, he would be J. Will.
Yeah. Nobody wants a J. Will jersey. That's crap.
I actually have a J. Will jersey. I mean, it doesn't say J. Will.
Right.
But
it says Williams.
Yeah, I have it from Memphis.
Sure.
Oh wow! I have the black.
But, you don't want to. You want a Williams jersey, but you don't want a J. Will jersey.
No. I have. Is that the only Jason Williams jersey you own then?
It is now. I had a Kings one. My mom, when my freshman year of college, a bunch of stuff that I left in my room at home, she decided that she was going to throw out, including probably 25 or 30 old jerseys.
Oh.
And to that point, every issue of Slam magazine ever made.
Oh. So you don't talk to her. I'm assuming you're not going there for Thanksgiving. I'll assume that she will not be getting a visit from you. No, but was it the black one? It had to be the black one. That was the only one, right?
The Kings jersey?
Yeah.
I had him in black, and I had Mitch Richmond in white.
That's great.
Nice.
And I had C-Web on the Bullets.
Oh boy! Wow. Well, these are.
I had Gary Payton on the Sonics.
I'd have to skim to believe them.
I had Jordan with the. I had Jordan with the script Chicago on red, and then in the black pinstriped 45. I mean, I had such good jerseys. It was like ridiculous. I had Penny Hardaway.
Cathartic for you. I'm glad.
I had.
Talk about it. Yeah,
I had Barkley, that like ugly blue and red with the weird looking rocket on the front.
Oh yeah.
I also had Barkley on the Suns. I had Kevin Johnson, the black Suns jersey. Oh my God! I mean, I had Gary Payton on the Sonics. I can't remember all of them. I was that Knicks fan that didn't have Ewing or Starks, but I had Mason and Oakley. I had such good jerseys.
Did you have late 90s Sonics or early 90s Sonics?
Mid 90s Sonics.
So after the change?
I think it might have been right before. It was still it had like the white stripe in the middle.
Yeah, that's the much better one.
Okay, yeah. It's not the red and orange and black. And
no.
Yeah. Those were terrible.
Yeah, and you know what? My friend, one of them had a Gary Payton Sonics jersey, and the other one had a Ray Allen Bucks jersey. And then when they were traded for each other, they both bought the other one and traded them.
Nice. So, last question, and it's definitely going to be the most controversial is
this one
from Thomas Wren Jr. at TRend19. Where does actual white chocolate rank in terms of your favorite chocolate?
Last.
What's your chocolate power rankings? Then?
Yeah, let's
we're gonna go. I'm gonna consider chocolate with things in it is like still that kind of chocolate. So for example, like a Crackle Bar is still milk chocolate, and like a Snickers is still milk chocolate. So the chocolates I'm ranking here are white chocolate, milk chocolate, and dark chocolate. Is there any other things that I even have to get through?
We found sweet chocolate was another one. I mean, that's mostly baking type. So yeah, no. If we're talking strictly like candy,
white chocolate is last, and it's really not even close, honestly. The only good kind of white chocolate is when you get that. It's like the Hershey bar that's like cookies and cream.
Right, the cookies and cream Hershey. Yeah.
Yeah. All other white chocolate can get out of here. Like that's not
even if it's surrounded in a pretzel. Is that still?
No, that is the one exception.
Okay, I was gonna say because those I am with you on that.
Chocolate and pretzel is
okay.
Legit.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because I think that's a big
Have you either of you guys ever had Rice Krispie treats with white chocolate surrounding the Rice Krispies?
No, but oh my god, that sounds good.
It sounds like a Christmas thing.
It's delightful. I think that somebody I used to work with used to bring them in during Christmas time.
Yeah, it seems like because then you can make it like a Frosty the Snowman or something like that. It's okay.
You can put like red and green sprinkles on it.
That might happen tonight. So I will let you know after tonight what my thoughts are because I think that might have to happen. That sounds
so
unbelievable.
Good. Yeah. Anyway, so white chocolate is last, milk chocolate is second, and dark chocolate is number one.
No.
I mean, I can't abide by anybody who doesn't like dark chocolate. I mean, I think it's nonsense if you don't like dark chocolate.
Jason, your thoughts?
Well, I like dark chocolate usually combined with things, but if I'm just having chocolate by itself, I guess I probably prefer milk chocolate over dark chocolate, but I don't know. Like, I'm usually more of a chocolate in combination with other items. So there's I don't know. I don't quite have a hot take here, I'm sad to say,
I think you know what? I think I'm with you. Like when you're eating it with something else, then I would say milk chocolate is better. But when you're eating it by itself, I go with dark chocolate.
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna eat, I'm trying to think. So like chocolate covered pretzels, I think I'd go with milk chocolate. Or like if you're choosing between a regular Kit Kat or a dark chocolate Kit Kat, you go with the regular Kit Kat. But if you're just going to sit down and eat some chocolate from like one of those fancy chocolate places, I think I go with the dark chocolate.
Well, Jason, I have a bit of a hot take, and Jared, I know you're going to vehemently disagree. Dark chocolate's the worst, and anybody who likes it is wrong, and I don't trust them. So,
I
said it.
You know what? We might have to cancel the ensuing Penny Hardaway podcast.
That's sad.
I won't come for that one. You and Jason could talk, and you could talk about dark chocolate.
I'm not sure if we could be on the same air anymore.
It's just the worst. I mean, let's be honest. It just tastes burnt. There's nothing worse than getting like a Milky Way dark. That's the worst thing ever, right?
I would not say it's the worst thing ever.
It's
there
the worst.
I would things I can think of that are worse.
There is nothing worse in the world than Milky Way dark.
I didn't want to have to go to this level, but I mean, that like I run the network that this podcast is.
I do. I don't care. I'm going guns blazing.
Or I mean, at least I help run it ostensibly.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I will get
11 good episodes, guys.
No, it was. You know what? There's going to be a mutiny because I'm going to have enough of the people that don't like dark chocolate on my side because there's got to be there can't just be me.
Dark chocolate, I will admit, is very divisive.
It's very polarizing.
But I like it because, so my dad is not a big chocolate guy, so the only other person in my family that eats a lot of chocolate is my mom, and she loves dark chocolate. So, like, my whole life I've been eating it. So I think if you grew up eating it a lot, I feel like you're going to be naturally bound to like it more than someone who didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my mom is a huge fan, but I would usually just tell her she's wrong. And we had this conversation, then I didn't live with her, after she kicked me out of the house when I was 3. So
I've told my mother she's wrong about a great many things, specifically about throwing out all of my stuff when I moved to college.
Exactly, yeah, as I was going to say.
But this is one thing that I do agree with her on. Dark chocolate is fantastic.
Yeah. I've been looking, for whatever reason, at the Whoppers webpage, the malted milk balls, during this entire time and really wanting a Whopper right now.
Oh, I have a lot left over from Halloween, so if you want, I can send them to you.
All right.
So if you can have them all, I have a pumpkin in my kitchen right now. It's just filled to the gill because I bought there was something that had like 4 really good things and it had Whoppers, which are awful, and I think we can all agree except for Jason apparently. But
I've actually never had a Whopper.
Oh, don't! You're good.
I'm now wondering what a dark chocolate Whopper would be like. Whoppers have the malted flavor, the crunchy malt flavor in the middle, which I don't like malts. Like when you have, like instead of a shake, anyone who makes a choice of malt over a shake, I don't understand you. But I do like the malt inside the chocolate. So,
well, we're opposite on there. I love it. Basically, have you ever had a malt ball, Jared?
I don't know. I don't think so.
They're not very good. You're okay.
They're excellent.
But I mean, listen, this is America. If you like a malt over a shake, you might as well get the hell out of here.
Oh man, I do.
There you go.
I'm just a weird. I'll see myself out. You guys, you take it from here, Jason. I'll see you guys later.
All right.
So the file. I'll put my headset down. I'll give you the file, and then we can just call this a day. But I'm glad we had this discussion.
All right. I'm glad you could go out in a blaze of glory, Rich. That's very good. All right.
It's been nice knowing you.
Yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's going to be like a retirement, unretirement, like Jason Williams in 2011, or I'm sorry, 2009.
Oh, look at that.
Are you back in a little while?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just don't file the paperwork. That was his mistake. So, all right, Jared.
You know what, though? Like real quickly before we go,
of course.
That one season with the Heat. I mean, I know he had a couple, but I'm pretty sure his first season with the Heat, like that season, he was legit really good.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty sure he shot like really well that season too. Like that was the one season where, in addition to all the other stuff he did, he shot well too.
Yeah, he had a 56 true shooting there, and his next career high was, let me sort this here, it's going to be 50. He had 55 his 1 year in Orlando, but like all the Sacramento seasons, he was hovering like under 50%.
Yeah.
The Orlando year, though, he didn't play nearly as much.
No. He played a lot of games,
actually,
but didn't. He
played 1,700 minutes in Orlando and played 1,874 in the first year in Miami. He was hurt a lot in Miami.
Right, that Miami year, he missed like 25 games or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and where he played all 82 games in the Orlando year, even though he was reserved. So, he shot 37% from three the first year in Miami. He actually shot 38% that year in Orlando. That was actually a stronger year than I realized. But yeah, he did. The efficiency started to kind of go up his last 2 years in Memphis too, and then at least overall 3-point range. He those couple of years were definitely his highlights. He did get better at that later in his career, but he was really weak early in his career, the first 4 seasons in particular. But
definitely. The game I remember most from that first Miami year was the clinching game of the East Finals.
Yeah, against Detroit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think he had. I want to say he scored like 25 points or something like that.
Yeah, he made like 10 shots in a row.
Yeah, he was awesome in that game. Like that, I feel like that was. I mean, it was very upsetting because it came on the Heat. But that was like a game where I was like, yes, Jason Williams is vindicated. But I mean, I was in Miami at the time too. That was my freshman year of college.
Oh, okay.
So I was going to a bunch of those games because one of my friends had tickets.
He shot 10 of 12 and scored 21 points. 10 of 12 for Jason Williams. That's
21.
Wow.
There it is. Okay.
yeah, 21 points. Yeah, wow. That was I didn't. Yeah, I'm looking at. I mean, we did a little bit of research here, but yeah, you really don't realize how good his like kind of last. I mean, not good in the sense of sort of, based off what he did previously, but yeah, I mean, those Orlando and Heat years were better than I thought.
Yeah, he settled into that role and played it pretty well. I mean, which is kind of an interesting place for him to go. I mean, maybe more boring as a player to watch and as an interesting guy, but as far as being more effective, he certainly filled that role pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about his defense at all. Obviously, there was
no, we don't have to.
He left something to be desired, but obviously, the Sacramento years and even the Memphis years were sort of the peak of Williams' sanity. but he might have been, more. I don't want to say more effective because he was definitely still more effective in Sacramento, but he was, more conducive to winning maybe when he went to Miami, especially in that first year, just because his role was so minimized because they had Shaq and they had Wade and they had
Antoine Walker.
Antoine, and I think they even had maybe still had Eddie. No, they didn't have Eddie Jones because he was in the Shaq trade.
Yeah. They had Posey was there.
Posey, that's who it was.
Yeah,
I remember. So that first time they won the finals, like I'll never forget Mike Breen doing the call. Posey hit like a corner three. I can't remember who it was against in the playoffs, but this kid that I worked with a couple summers later. When I was interning somewhere, he used to do an impression of Mike Breen making the call of like Wade's pass to Posey, and it was like the best Mike Breen impression I've ever heard.
We'll have to get him on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even remember the kid's name.
You find it. Well, you go find it out.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I remember it. His name was Elliot Pines. And,
all right. Searching him right now.
We used to call him E Dirty.
That's a good nickname. Not quite as good as White Chocolate, but that's pretty good.
I'm pretty sure he was in my phone as E Dirty Pines.
Wait a minute. Where would he have gone to school? Not to be a total creep, but
I have no idea where he went to school.
This is the age of the guy. He is currently the coordinator of basketball operations at the NBA Developmental League.
No way.
I swear, I'm looking at it right now. Elliot Pines, coordinator basketball operations, NBA Development League. It got him.
How do you spell Pines?
Pines?
Yeah, but I don't think that he is that.
Yeah, I don't know. He was a promotions intern at the Madison Square Garden, a sponsorship intern. The guy's he's a jet setter. I don't know. Yeah. Or else it's this Elliot Pines. So now
I found him on Facebook. He went to NYU.
Yep, this is him.
Oh my God.
So we can get him on. Eat dirty.
That's hilarious.
I feel like Serial right now. We're just like uncovering people's past, and it's all going to make sense in a big narrative later.
Listen, I mean, I'm not a reliable narrator, though. I might be a psychopath.
Well, I think that's about as good of a place to wrap it up as we're going to get. But Jared, anything specific that you want to tell listeners of our show about you and what you're doing that we may not have covered in your introduction?
No, I think you guys covered it. I'm all over the internet these days. Definitely check out everything across the entire HP Basketball Network. We've got Hardwood Paroxsym. Obviously, you're listening to this podcast on Podium Game. We've got Nylon Calculus, Mid-Level Exceptional, Friendly Bounce, and Upside and Motor. I think I got all 6 right there. If I didn't, then check out the site that I missed too. But obviously, all the podcasts on this site are terrific. You guys do a great job, of course. And I'll think about not firing you for not liking dark chocolate.
That's all I ask. I just consider it. Just consider it. But I totally understand your justification. But I found what was it? E Dirty?
You did.
So there you go.
I think that totally makes up for it.
It should. I mean, come on. And now you guys. I mean, now he's in the NBA. So there you go.
I can't believe that. That's crazy.
All right, Jared. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we will be back to talk more Jason Williams in just a moment. All right, and we are back. We're going to talk about the early stages of Jason Williams' career. And he grew up in the tiny town of Belle in southern West Virginia. Actually teamed with Randy Moss at DuPont High School. They were a famous tandem, and they both had some of the same issues with getting a little bit of trouble in school and having issues in college that kind of led Randy Moss to play at a small school. I believe, didn't he play at Marshall, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes, he was going to go to Florida State, and then he went to Marshall.
Yeah, instead, and then Jason. He's not a big fan of school. He
not surprising.
He signed with Providence initially, then was released from his commitment when the coach left for Clemson. And then he enrolled at Marshall, where he played for a season under Billy Donovan, And then Donovan went to Florida, where he's still coaching. Of course, has led them to 2 national titles and a bunch of acclaim. So then Williams had to sit out a season. Then he got sick of school. He hated it so much that he left school and he went back home to West Virginia. Then his father and his brother prodded him to go back to Florida. Donovan agreed to take him back. And then he ended up failing 2 marijuana tests and was kicked off the team in February of '98. He said later that he thought he wouldn't be tested again because he failed the first test, so he thought he was done. Which
I like the logic. I mean, the logic is good.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't know if it's sound, but I get it. I guess.
There you go. So there's an article from the Sacramento Bee from June of '98, right after he was drafted. Jerome James was also drafted along with him, who's going to be mentioned a little bit later in this podcast. His agent basically said, hey, he didn't want to play in a big city. He'd never lived in a city bigger than Gainesville, Florida. So he was happy in Sacramento. I guess that's sort of an interesting way to put it, but good for him. And of course, '99 is the lockout, so they don't start playing until January of '99. But the Kings are a big surprise that year. They end up 27-23 after they were 27-55 the prior season. They were first in the league in pace. And they added Chris Webber, Vlade Divac, Petr Stojakovic, and Chris Adelman. They also had Corliss Williamson and Tariq Abdul-Wahad, who had been there before. And amazingly, this is the first winning record for them since 1983, which a year they didn't even make the playoffs. They made the playoffs a couple times in between them with losing records, but yeah, that's 16 years without a winning record is I'm sure there may be some, the Clippers might have had a longer stretch, but there aren't too many. There can't be too many stretches where that's happened for anything longer than that.
Yeah, that's and I remember that too. And that was one of the big deals about, and that was what was kind of cool narratives too around Sacramento is, they always mentioned on those shows that this was a guy or a team rather that was supported. The fans always went there, even if they weren't good. Even, through thick and thin, they still went there and were finally rewarded with this team that was not only good, but also one of the most exciting teams in the league. Absolutely. I mean, immediately almost from his arrival in Weber's and all that sort of stuff, almost immediately just now this sensational team that was on national TV all the time because you had to watch them because they were just so different and unique and really fun. I mean, super young as well, which is another interesting part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so there's a big buzz around him as a rookie. There in February of '99, there's already an SI article about him and the Kings. There's comparisons to Maravich, of course, and talking about his debut at San Antonio, where he had 21 points, 5 steals, 3 assists, and then Spurs point guard Avery Johnson said that rookie almost put me into retirement, which is a great. I cannot possibly do Avery Johnson's voice, but if you imagine it in his voice, that would be good.
I have a friend who can do the Avery Johnson.
There you go.
Maybe I can give him a call later when we do the Avery Johnson podcast. We'll have
we got a couple voices that are going to be coming along on the podcast. So
Mike Green, we could do Mike Green and Avery Johnson.
Yeah,
it could just be a studio. I mean, that could just do a whole game and the commentator. See a studio
some
show.
Some avant-garde over and back podcast we'll be having here, and then the writer describes watching Williams handle the ball is like hearing Pat Boone sing with James Brown's voice, which that's a decent metaphor.
Yeah, I'll get it.
There's an article in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette about a month later where it talks about Williams just embarrassing Steve Nash, destroying him, during a game, and then Nash saying that I'm not going to get out of shape because he's doing it to a lot of people, but if I were in the crowd or in the sideline, maybe I'd be oohing and eyeing too, because then I wouldn't have to concentrate on the next move. And then there's Vlade Divac, who compares him to Magic Johnson, who of course he played with, just saying that he sees everything. There's not one single angle that he doesn't see. And then, pointing out that the Kings are the highest scoring team in the league, although in pace they were actually only offensive rating. And because of the pace, that pushed them up to the most points scored in the league and the and the most points given up. But this is, of course, in time in which pace adjusted statistics aren't understood. So they were actually 13th in the league in offensive rating and 18th in defensive rating. So about the middle of the league in each.
And it leads to a lot of, and that's a popular thing among, and it happened with D'Antoni in Phoenix as well, is that people would just look at the points they allowed per game and go, this is ridiculous. You're allowing, 105 points per game. Like, you can't win like this. And it's like, well, we're also scoring like 110, and it really doesn't. I mean, we also, but all right, whatever. And now I think we understand that a lot better. Yeah. But at the time, there was always sort of the, let's look at points allowed per game. Oh my God. And I remember at the time, even people saying, well, they play fast or whatever, but that was still like, you can't, that won't win in the playoffs. You need to slow it down or whatever. So.
There you go. There's a deeper LA Times profile on him from just a couple weeks later, talking about one of the famous early plays. It was against Mike Bibby of all people, where he came down dribbling left-handed. He suddenly leaped, did a scissor kick, kept his dribble going went behind his back, and then I think Williams made a pass to get to get it.
He actually he takes a jumper after that. He lands and then shoots right away. I'm still not sure that's not traveling, but all right. Yeah. I watched it a bunch of times and I'm like, I mean, maybe I don't know. Maybe someone could let me know.
I guess technically he's dribbling, but if you leave your feet, that
and it's like a hop step sort of, but and I get that for like layups, but it's a weird hop step. Yeah, it's like a hop step and then kind of another slight movement and then a shot. So I don't know, but.
And he talks about
nobody complained. Bibby didn't complain. Bibby just kind of went like,
there you go. You got me. So
it's okay. Then I'll let it slide.
I'm going to get traded for you in 3 years and make this team better. So
it's a weird one, yeah. Because I watched it earlier. I was like, he's just like he's thinking. He's like, one day I'll get you.
Mike Bibby had the ability to see into the future, so
obviously.
And he basically talks. He says that he doesn't really think about his plays before he does them. He thinks he plays like, if he does get to thinking, he starts to play like a robot. So you just go out and do whatever, Always a great quote that Jay will. So there's also a great play where he just basically fakes out Gary Payton completely on a crossover, and Gary Payton is just like sitting there and like smirks and even gives him sort of an attaboy afterward about just amazing thing, which for a guy who was as competitive as Payton was, that's sort of that's kind of a fun reaction.
And that's one of my favorite things of when you watch these highlights of Jason Williams. And I think for people that have watched him or when we talked about it or go back and watch him and maybe watch obviously the first time and just have your jaw drop when you see what he does, but then go back and look at the reactions of other players on the court as he's doing stuff. One that I'm is very notable is the elbow pass, the famous elbow pass. It's in the rookie sophomores game or whatever. So Lamar, it's him and he passes to Rafe LaFrentz. That's the name of the, I can't wait to do a podcast on him. But one of the defenders, the guy that's guarding Williams technically is Lamar Odom, obviously in his Clipper days. He does the elbow pass and you just see Lamar Odom's face just light up and he goes like, woo, like it just happened to him. He just got scored on. Luckily, it's a rookie sophomore game, but you see it a lot of times in real games. Like you mentioned, Gary Payton is even just like, got me. And but Bibby sometimes does that as well. But this one in particular, if you watch this one, you just see as it's happening, Lamar Odom knows it's happening. And it's just like, oh, that's awesome. And then unfortunately, the guy scores right on him. But it's a rookie sophomore, so who cares? So. Yeah. But that's definitely watch the reactions of other players. Like they couldn't even handle themselves with a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely. So late in April '99, there's a New York Times article sort of talking about the white chocolate nickname, and it was actually created by a Kings media relations assistant who talks about basically just because his game was really sweet, and his game reminded her of schoolyard street ball in Chicago. And Williams embraced the white chocolate nickname early on, but kind of regarded it more warily because there was some attention to it that might become a distraction. The Kings actually just were, made uncomfortable by the nicknames highlighting that a white player has what is perceived as a black game. It discouraged it. They were talking about how they asked commentators not to mention it and so forth. Apparently even Williams' agent didn't want it to be there. There apparently was a contest on ESPN.com to replace the name, and the winner was Thrilla in Vanilla, which
is pretty awesome.
Which is not too bad, but it's another, of course, the name that is racial connotations, and
pretty damn awesome. So.
Yes, and white chocolate's a great nickname too. And I totally get, hey, you are making these nicknames are kind of based on like assumptions of people's race or what they're supposed to be and stereotypes. So I get like if someone's uncomfortable with it, that's perfectly reasonable. I don't think that's ridiculous at all, but I do think like it is, like I think this is such a benign instance of that, and I think there's a lot of complexities to it where I don't think like the name is like, I don't think there's like an obvious like, is it a problem or is it not a problem? It's just kind of like, it could be, but I would say it's pretty easy to be okay with it as well, but maybe somebody would feel differently, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. So, and then the Kings make the playoffs. They lose to the Jazz in the 3-2 series. It's sort of made the Jason Williams as a rookie versus John Stockton entering his 148th playoff game, being game one of the series, was just sort of like looking at the contrast between them, and basically like Stockton just basically schooled him, in the game, and Williams just wasn't working against the sophisticated Jazz defense, and Stockton of course was a tremendous defender. So then we go to the 99-2000 season. They're 44-38, first in pace again. They add Nick Anderson, who apparently had a relationship with Jason Williams dating back to like when he was younger. Williams he's second on the team in minutes. I would say played kind of comparatively well, at least stats wise. There's not really. Other than more minutes, I mean, his shooting's about the same. He does take a lot of 3-pointers, and this was his worst year at that, 28%. So that's not so good.
No.
Everything else is, it pretty much fine for a player at his, for a player at his position and at his skill development. The turnovers aren't actually that high. They are a bit higher than they were the previous year, but overall. He's doing similar things in a similar role. But although there is there's an SI article from March of 2000 where there's kind of some backlash on the way he plays. Like Danny Ainge called him the most overrated player in basketball, although he did say that I admit I loved watching him play and do some of that stuff the previous year, but he would drive me crazy as a coach. And then Bimbo Coles of the Hawks calls him out of basically like saying, I don't think I ever saw him throw a regular pass. And Williams he kind of like shrugs it off and defends himself. It's like, hey, we're a lot better, even though I'm just a part of it. And Adelman's mostly chill about the struggles, although he does say the 3-point shooting, is a problem. And they do kind of talk about like there have been some incidents where Williams has been rude to the media or kind of gotten into it with fans who have heckled him, and basically just talks about being well known is something I never asked for. I'm not that comfortable with it. So just kind of maybe he's a little bit of an introvert,
Yeah. Oh, and there's a quote in one of the articles as well where he was eating dinner with his family or whatever, and he was talking about how much he hates when fans kind of come up to him and ask for, and there was one quote where he says, someone said, hey, sorry to bother you. And he replied, well, don't.
Yeah. And he said he thought it was disgusting when people like bothered him when he eat, which is sort of an interesting word to choose. But 2000 and 2001 season, the Kings, they're 55-27. They had Doug Christie, Hida Turkoglu, and Bobby Jackson and Luz Williamson. So they're basically now the team that that they would be for the next 3 or 4 years when they're really, really strong. They fought a second in pace in the league. I would assume Dallas was number one.
That was the phonetic Dallas.
Okay.
Yeah, that was.
And they're up to 9th in offensive rating, 7th in defensive rating. So getting to be the point in which they're close to an elite team. They do win in the first round, but they're swept by the Lakers in the second round. This was the year where the Lakers had sort of an iffy regular season, but then totally trashed everyone in the postseason. Right. They ended up 15-1, I think, in the playoffs. Yep, but they were so at this point, basically the relationship between Rick Adelman and Jason Williams is not so strong, and the Grizzlies decide to make a change. So We're going to take a little bit of break from the Jason Williams to talk about a related subject. So we'll be back in just a moment.
A 6'1" guard from Florida, number 55, Jason Williams.
Jason Williams! Oh, boy!
Williams has eyes in the back of his head.
Oh, my goodness, that was vintage Pistol Pete Maravich in the form of Jason Williams.
Simply a genius with a basketball. That's an assist probably no other point guard in the league could make.
All right, we're back here on the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. We obviously had a long discussion with Jared about candy and food, and we're going to continue that because, goddamn it, we're doing a podcast about white chocolate, so we're going to talk about food. Jason, this is the best NBA food nicknames, and I'll be honest, are all these accurate, or are these just like there's some here that I was like, I don't think I've ever. There's some. I mean, there's obvious ones. I mean, the first one we're going to list, I think is obvious. There's other ones like, Joe Bryant is another one that people know. Some of these are a little out of it.
Well, I mean, I at least Googled these to make sure that someone said that these were guys who were associated with these names. I mean, I kind of ranked them in order of like either veracity or of goodness, So we're going to talk about the best or most obvious ones first, and kind of go to the more obscure ones as. And
you ask people on Twitter as well, so these are crowdsourced.
We know that Twitter and other aspects of the internet have never been inaccurate before.
Exactly. So I mean, I have to at least believe that our Twitter followers know what they're talking about. Wouldn't just make up a nickname about something.
No, that would be ridiculous.
That their friends called. I mean, they're not going to do that.
I think all of these, or at least almost all of these, are also in Basketball Reference. So you're not going to tell me the Basketball Reference is wrong.
Well, that's one of the funny things when you go to Basketball Reference. Sometimes you get these they have nicknames for guys, and I'm like, I don't think I've ever heard. Like for baseball, they have it a lot as well. Where I'm just like, I don't think anybody's ever called them that, but maybe they did. I don't know that, but okay, I'm glad because they make me laugh pretty much every time when you see. There's a few in here that I've seen on Basketball Reference that I remember just laughing my ass. So I'm appreciative of it. Absolutely. Regardless.
So we began, of course, with Chocolate Thunder, Daryl Dawkins, known for his backboard breaking dunks. My personal favorite, Cornbread, Cedric Maxwell. I forgot to look up the origin of.
Did he crumble under pressure?
No, the opposite. And he's the. I believe the NBA all-time leader in shooting percentage as well.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Why is he Cornbread? Then?
Cornbread's
flaky and
I assume it's some sort of country thing. But
he was from North Carolina. He probably had a twang to him or whatever. He's from North Carolina. I don't think I've ever heard him talk, but yeah, that would make sense. But.
I mean, that would be why I would, we'll have to, if someone wants to weigh in and let us know why he's named Cornbread. If not, that'll be research we have to do for another podcast. So, next is Jelly Bean Joe Bryant, who's Kobe's dad, played a couple years in the league, but played most of his career overseas. Now this is stretching a little bit, but the microwave Vinnie Johnson, you make food in a microwave. So, you have to heat it up. You get Vinnie Johnson to heat it up for you, hot plate John Williams, as opposed to hot rod John Williams, who I didn't realize the other John Williams also came in the same league we came in the league in the same year. And also, they both went to school in Louisiana, apparently. So the two John Williams are interconnected. And Lamar Odom, I kind of forgot that he was called the Candy Man for a while.
I do remember that, yeah. I always thought that was Oliver Candy. I always called Michael
Well,
Candy
I think they both were, but I think Odom,
You can't, no, they were on the same team. You can't have both guys be the Candy Man.
Well, no, I think Odom was later in his career when he, wasn't it during a playoff series? Wasn't there some sort of thing with that?
I honestly don't remember.
All right.
I don't remember Odom being it, but I think he was another one of those guys like Dwight Howard or whatever that just used to his diet was I eat gummy bears or whatever, and they're like, please stop doing that. Please, here's a nutritionist. Please.
I remember there being, I remember some sort of thing during one of the playoff series, and I don't remember the specifics now. I feel bad, because we like to do our research ahead of time, but this one I forgot. Then there was the Whopper, Billy Pultz. Maybe he was just a big fan of Whoppers, as I am, as we've established. But
okay, so I looked at it real quick. There's an ESPN. There must have been some sort of special they did or whatever, and it's called Lamar Odom the Candy Man, and it says this feature on Lamar Odom revealed his love of candy, and it's him going down the candy aisle and thumbing about what's his favorite candy.
There you go.
So there you go. So he is another one of those guys. Yeah, I thought he was one of those where Derrick Rose was that way. Dwight Howard famously was. These guys that just when they come into the league, they just eat like Skittles, and it's like, please, eat real food. Like, you cannot be an elite NBA player and only eat Skittles, but they do.
Yeah.
So,
so the Whopper, Billy Pultz, who was played most of his career, well, about half of it in the ABA and then in the NBA till the early '80s. He was a big guy. And then we're kind of getting now into the suspect ones. Channing Frye apparently is known as Buffet of Goodness. There was
is he really a buffet of goodness? I mean,
yeah,
there's like one or two courses that are okay.
Right.
But...
Yes. I mean, the 3-point shooting is excellent. I recommend that course. It provides the floor spacing. I guess
buffet. That's a lot.
Yeah, he's more like, I feel like he's more of like a component to a good buffet.
Right, like an appetizer of goodness.
Yeah,
like a good appetizer.
Yeah, there you go.
Good TGI Fridays, like pick 3 appetizer deal or something.
Apparently, Jalen Rose, when he played for the Raptors, was known as Captain Crunch for his performance during crunch time, which I have a hard time believing that one. And my favorite one out of all these probably is Jazzy Cabbages for Sarunas Jazikevich. I
do remember that.
Yes, because Don Nelson couldn't pronounce his name, and I have a hard time pronouncing his name too. So I understand Don Nelson's dilemma there.
Yeah, that one I do remember. So that one is an accurate.
That one is an accurate. And then,
maybe that was just me and my friends, but it's apparently not.
Yeah.
So.
And then there's apparently OJ Mayo's nickname is the grocery list. Although Mayo, of course, he already has a food name.
As a twofer.
Yeah, he doesn't need to have a nickname because it's already there.
Well, okay. I didn't get the grocery list at first, but now I do. So
there you go.
Because orange juice and mayonnaise.
Oh, so. Yeah. I forgot orange juice. Yeah.
Yeah, the OJ. Yeah, okay. So I get it now. So it's
the grocery list.
That's a terrible grocery list, though. If you're only going to the grocery store and you're only acquiring orange juice and mayonnaise, like, what are you doing with your life? Like, where are you going?
Put them. Yeah. It's time for you to catch up. That's all.
I was gonna say, like, at least get like a chocolate thunder in there. Get who do we have? Cornbread, Cedric. I mean,
some jelly beans.
Yeah,
right,
microwave. Right. Have Lamar Odom come over.
Go to Burger King and get a Whopper.
Yeah.
Sergio.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, there you go.
Sergio Rodriguez.
I was thinking Whopper candy because I'm so chocolate right now.
Yeah,
can't even think of other foods. Like,
Sergio Rodriguez, who's Spanish chocolate. I do remember that. I remember
that's just another white guy that does things that are flashy.
Things,
so he is black because but.
Jerome James' nickname was Big Snacks, presumably because he was fat. Yeah,
that's
who was of course, as we mentioned, drafted along with J. Will. Bobby Simmons, known as Chinese food, and apparently this came from a quote where he said he didn't like going to Japan because he didn't like Chinese food. Because I think they went there was a preseason game there or something in Japan. So
yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember the quote. I don't remember that being like his new nickname, but I'm glad it is because I'm all in favor.
I'm glad as well. And then finally, Nick Young, but before he was Swaggy P, was known as Bean Burrito. It's not quite as swaggy, but
Yeah, but I wonder what made him Bean Burrito, but. I'm glad. I mean, I don't care. I'm happy. I just want to know. I need to know how that became.
I mean, I don't have answers for you. Sorry.
I just can't even think of how we get to that.
I don't know. Well, listeners, you can add us at Over and Back NBA, or you can post in the show comments on this post at thepodiumgame.com if you can answer any of our questions.
We need Cornbread Cedric Maxwell and Bean Burrito Nick Young. I think we got most of the other ones.
I think we're good otherwise, yes. But, yeah. So
Buffet of Goodness I might need to have a little bit of a talk about, but everything else I'll
all right. So. Well, we appreciate that. Maybe Captain Crunch. I'm kind of.
That's Mr. Crunch Time is Jalen Rose. I mean, that's I would have nobody give me the ball more than mid 2000s Jalen Rose in Crunch Time. So, we're gonna head back into the land of white chocolate and talk about going. We're gonna go to Memphis.
Jason quickly into the front court. Bull behind the back dribble, into the lane, finger roll flip, hangs and drops.
Another look at it behind his back, a little shake and bake, hangs the ball up in front of 2 defenders.
LaFrentz the rebound. The sophomore's out on the move. Williams in the middle. Behind the back to LaFrentz. Down the lane. He drew the foul.
All the great passers, they know where the trailer is. Yes. And this is just a great move because he picked up that trailer as he was crossing over half court and then never once turned his head.
All right, we're back here talking Jason Williams, obviously white chocolate. We're talking about now his post-Sacramento playing career. He was traded to the Memphis Grizzlies famously, and this was their first year in Memphis. They were currently in the process of transitioning from Vancouver to Memphis, pretty famously, and that'd be something I'd love to talk about as well. Sort of that franchise as a whole, and their sort of less than stellar run in Vancouver. But obviously, he was traded almost straight up for Mike Bibby. There was a few guys in there. There was Nick Anderson, who at this point was kind of just a shell of his former self, barely played at all for the Kings. And then it was Brent Price was involved with Mike Bibby in that trade. But just kind of a franchise-altering trade for a lot of ways. And what was kind of interesting is in doing the research of this is that it was them, the Grizzlies, that initiated the contact to the Kings about trading Mike Bibby for Jason Williams, because I didn't know that. I always sort of was under the impression that, and it was sort of the narrative too, that the Kings got better because of that trade, more so than the Grizzlies, but it was interesting that they were the ones that sort of initiated it.
Yeah, and I mean, there was also, it did seem like, Williams had a little bit less playing time. In crunch time, they were going to Bobby Jackson some more. He and Adelman apparently weren't getting along at this point. There's a Sacramento Bee article from the day of the trade, June 28, 2001, and basically they weren't really able to communicate, and the organization decided, like, oh, we're going to go with Adelman and re-sign him to an extension. And in fact, the quote is, they decided to keep Adelman instead of Jason. It's really that simple. He'd also, had his other issues, been suspended for testing positive for marijuana, fined 3 times by the league for improper conduct with fans during games, and then there was one where he made anti-Asian slurs at a fan in Oakland, later apologized for the remarks. And he also, he kind of lashed out about, they need to do something about fans, going after us, and kind of that feeling that was unfair that you couldn't respond, but which doesn't necessarily show a huge amount of maturity, but interesting to see sort of the coverage of him in Memphis, and he and owner Michael Heisley were golfing buddies, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, that's got to be an interesting. But as I'm sort of thinking about it, I wonder if there was some sort of element of we need because obviously he was still a sensation, and less so than he was sort of his first few years, but still a relative sensation, still one that people were interested in. Still a high selling jersey. I wonder if it was a fame thing for Memphis, where they're looking at, hey, look, we're bringing this franchise to Memphis. Who better to kind of spark this fire than a Jason Williams type guy, and we can get him. I mean, we can reasonably get him. Maybe Mike Bibby doesn't fire that. I don't know what the exact reasoning behind it was, but an interesting thing. But yeah, him as a golf buddy with anybody seems very interesting. Just Jason Williams playing golf.
Yeah.
I wonder if he's flashy as a golfer too, or if he's kind of like his putts are just like ridiculous and they go like around the hole and then back in or whatever. Like he's got to have something, right?
The club behind his back.
He can't just be a normal golfer, right? Like there's no way.
It's hard to say. Yeah. But he, they also, they drafted Pau Gasol. Well, they actually traded, for Pau Gasol and Shane Battier. They both were rookies that year. They also had Stromile Swift in his second year, who looked like he was going to kind of be an athletic, exciting big guy, which didn't really work out for anybody there. So they were kind of rebuilding, again, even though, Williams and Bibby were about the same age, but, they were kind of bringing in some younger players and trying to start over because where they were wasn't very good. And they were 23-59, which actually equaled the franchise's best up to that point. They were the third worst team in the NBA. Williams actually, he did play better in Memphis, at least statistically. His PER, assist percentage, and usage all went way up. And then at the end of the season, or toward the end of the season, the Grizzlies ended up hiring Jerry West as their GM, pulling him from the Lakers, which was, a really big deal at the time. Of course, West, was an important architect for the 80s Lakers dynasty, and then their rebuild in the 90s to get Kobe and Shaq together.
Yeah.
So, one of the great, GMs of all time. So they really added to that. And then the next season, they brought in Hubie Brown to replace Sidney Lowe after an 0-8 start. They end up finishing a little bit better, 28-54. They added Wesley Person. They drafted Drew Gooden and Gordon Gierczek, but they actually traded them for Mike Miller around the trade deadline. to the Magic, which is sort of an interesting thing to have happened for 3 rookies to be involved in a trade.
Was Miller a rookie then?
I believe Miller. No, he might. That might have been
because he was a little bit before.
That might have been his second year. Because I think he was drafted.
He won the rookie of the year. I know for a fact as a member of the Magic.
Okay, that would have been 2000. Okay, that makes sense. So
yeah, okay, so close, but hey.
Okay, I was. That's right. That was my mistake. But
no, you're good. I have vivid memories of him with like short hair and no tattoos playing on the Magic. So.
Yeah, he
had like one tattoo. I think it was like one like minor tattoo in the middle of his arm. And
he played 2 years. That's right. That would have been his 3rd season. So
okay.
But they were kind of they had sort of the building blocks of the guys. They had Lorenzen Wright as well. They got Earl Watson that year. Guys who kind of would be the key guys for their success over the next 3 or 4 seasons. He continued improving. He had better shooting and fewer turnovers. Wasn't like a terrific player, but was still, a bit of a better player, at least statistically, than he had been in Sacramento.
Certainly, yeah, and that's a team. It's an interesting team as well because I always forget that they were this successful this quickly. I mean, we sort of know the Grizzlies now and this most recent one with Zach Randolph, and forget that the Gasol run was. I mean, they got successful at a point, and we're going to talk about that season here in a bit. But it was interesting to see sort of the building blocks come together. And yeah, he wasn't a sensation as much anymore, but he was becoming kind of a reliable rotation. You know what I mean? Not a superstar like he sort of was. Culturally this first 2 years, but sort of becoming a reliable sort of everyday NBA player at this point, 5 or 6 years into his career. So
yeah, and the next year they're the surprise team of the season. They finished 50-32, adding James Posey, Bo Outlaw, and Bonzi Wells. But they are swept in the first round by the Spurs. There's a article from the New York Times about basically focusing on Williams from April 2004. Talking about how he can still make the flashy play, but does it less than he used to. His quote is, "When I do something crazy now, it's for the purpose of helping the team," which is, like
as opposed to before when I was
like, whatever. And then Brown, there is a lot on kind of like Brown sort of getting on him about saying like, he should be at the top echelon, with his great talent, but he's not quite there. He should be All-NBA. Also sort of critical of him for not playing good defense, not driving, and not getting enough free throws. He's also replaced by Earl Watson in key situations, and Williams not reacting well. There's a long anecdote about Williams basically storming out of practice or not showing up to practice the next day after he wasn't there in crunch time, and later sort of apologizing to everyone and saying he made a mistake and wouldn't do it again, and basically for the most part showing maturity other than that instance, and sort of talking about how they're he and Hubie are both different yet older, and this is Hubie's first year, well I guess second year now, after he hadn't coached for 15-16 years. I mean, he was in his late 60s or maybe even a little bit older at this point, so he was sort of an odd guy to pick, even though obviously Hubie Brown's one of our favorite announcers and
certainly
basketball minds and all that, but just sort of odd that just because he hadn't coached for so long for him to be brought in to do that. And even though it seems like there'll obviously be just that conflict of generational conflict or whatever, they kind of make it work, and at least for this season have a fun good team.
Mm-hmm.
And then
terrible jerseys though. I forgot how bad they were.
Well, weren't they a little better by then?
They were better, but
they weren't.
They're still.
They weren't as.
The color scheme is still all terrible.
Yeah.
It's still got the teal. It's still got the Vancouver Grizzly bright teal. I mean, they weren't as ridiculous. I mean, there's not Kodiak Bear grabbing a ball and and tribal Aztec, but it's still not very good. It was basically just that jersey, but just they had Memphis in big block letters at the front. They look like thrown together jerseys, but they eventually got there.
Yeah, that's true. So, then 2005, they start off 5-7. Hubie leaves. Lionel Hollins has an 0-4 stint as an interim coach, and then Mike Fratello joins in. They play well the rest of the season. They go from 10th in the league to 25th in pace, so they slow it down, which isn't necessarily Jason Williams' game, of course. He and Earl Watson actually end up playing a similar number of minutes that season. So he's sort of it's kind of a similar situation to where he helps the team, rise from where they are, but then sort of there's a backup point guard who's now sort of taking his his spot or taking up minutes that he has. So it's not quite as rosy of a picture, and they end up being swept by the Suns in the first round. I believe they're swept in the following season in the first round as well. They're basically like 0-12. They don't win in those playoff runs. They don't actually win.
No, it wasn't until the recent Zach Randolph one that they actually won a play. I remember that being part of the situation is that like they are. They've been to the playoffs a bunch of times, but we still haven't won a playoff game. Yeah. Like it was. Remember that being the big moment that hey, we got one, and then now they've had decent success as of late. And this year, they're one of the best teams in the NBA. So go them.
04-05 was the first year of the current Grizzlies jerseys, which are much better.
Oh yes, yeah. They got rid of the teal. The teal, no more teal. Yeah. So, the fact that you have teal until 2004 is just not good.
It's a little sad. Yeah, they really do have great jerseys now.
No, now that I love them, they're one of my favorites in the league.
They absolutely are. So, it was interesting. That I just forgot about the 2001 article about talking about the Bibby trade. They mentioned that the Grizzlies are expected to change their name.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, but
it makes sense.
Yeah, because Grizzlies don't really fit in Memphis. Now it feels right. Even though it's kind of like Utah Jazz. Like even though it's,
you just get used to
right,
it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Los Angeles Lakers, all those ones that are ridiculous, but you get used to it after enough time. Did they say what the other? I think I remember reading that article. But I don't remember that part. Did they say what other names that we're thinking of?
They just said it was part of a move to
the rebranding,
and they were planning to change the name. That was just a one sentence line. Yeah. So after the season, Memphis changes directions. A lot of teams change directions. Actually, Williams is involved in the biggest trade in NBA history.
This guy's a doozy.
Yeah, it involves 5 teams and 13 players, and there's actually a related trade the same day, which is technically a separate trade, but really fits in, with it as well. But basically,
stay with us here.
Yeah.
Try.
I only named the players involved who actually play in the NBA. There's a couple other players that are draft rights involved that don't end up ever playing, so I did not name them. So. The Heat get Jay Will, they get Antoine Walker, who was with the Celtics, they get James Posey, also with the Grizzlies, and Andre Emmett, who was also with the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies get Eddie Jones from Miami and Raul Lopez. The Celtics got Curtis Borchert and Quintel Woods, and 2 second-round draft picks, one of which became Nikola Pekovic.
Which is unbelievable. I'm so glad that Basketball Reference added that, where you see where the picks ended up, like the lineage of draft picks, because it's the greatest thing ever. Like, granted, it was probably 10 years. It was 10 years later, but hey, it's still awesome. So
absolutely. The Jazz get Greg Ostertag.
Oh, good.
And the Hornets get Rasul Butler and Kirk Snyder.
Had to get Greg Ostertag back. We just had to have Greg Ostertag.
They absolutely did. And then,
I don't even remember when he left. I don't remember him even playing in Sacramento.
I
know he was there, but I have no memories of that flat top playing in Sacramento.
We'll get that podcast on the line. The Greg Ostertag podcast.
I am not doing that one. That must be the most boring podcast we ever do. Is there anything interesting about Greg Ostertag?
His name, I guess, but
yeah, his hair,
yeah. And then the technically separate trade earlier in the day, the Grizzlies traded Bonzi Wells to the Kings for Bobby Jackson and Ostertag and Borchert, who of course were part of the 5-team trade. So I don't know why it wouldn't have technically been included, because it has players that are included, but I guess it happened. I don't know. It's whatever. It's definitely the biggest day of transactions, I would have to think, in NBA history, in terms of a trade anyway. So.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Yeah. So, and it's one of the best Basketball Reference lists as well, because it's just this gigantic blob of names, and you can't even make sense of it. It's so hard to get where the hell it's going. But no, it's definitely an interesting trade. And
it really worked out well for the Heat.
No, certainly, yeah.
Not so much for anyone.
Yeah, everybody else kind of got screwed.
Yeah.
I didn't know we realized the Heat were just like, thank you. Okay, we'll take like 4 productive players, and you can have Kentel Woods.
I mean, there was like sign and trade. I mean, it was complicated because there was like sign and trade stuff about it. I mean, Eddie Jones actually gave the Grizzlies a pretty good year, although he ended up back in Miami the year afterward.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Butler is a guy. I don't know how long he played for the Hornets, but he's still in the league. But unbelievable, he's like been playing for like 12 years. I mean, that's, He,
really not doing anything.
I mean,
really
but he stuck around. I mean, that's
go him.
Yeah,
because he played on the Bulls like 3 years ago, and he was just there. Like he couldn't get off the bench. He was just awful.
Yeah.
And then like the other day, they were like, I think he's still in Miami, right?
No. I think Rasul Butler, I think plays for is it the Clippers now?
that sounds right. Yeah, and I saw him. I was like, why is Rasul like no? Like Rasul Butler cannot be in the league still.
Yeah,
that guy's made himself quite a career.
I was surprised. Yeah, I mean, he apparently plays for the Pacers. No, the Wizards. He plays for the Wizards now.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Yeah, the Wizards have kind of a weird.
All those teams are correct though, because I think he has played for all those teams at some point in like the past 5 years.
He's got to be up. He's got to be up there on the all-time. No, not quite on the all-time teams list. So yeah, but
I'm very curious how Pekovic got to. Oh God, it's a much bigger trade. How Pekovic got to the Timberwolves. I'm not even going to do it. But essentially, Olowokandi and Wally Szczerbiak were a part of this trade.
Yeah. Well, also it involves the Heat. Actually, it's a later trade involving it because Anton Walker trade, right? Yeah. So going to the Timberwolves.
Oh no, it's not. No, it's a separate one.
No. I'm sorry, not this trade, but a trade involving the Heat in a couple years in 2008, where Anton Walker gets traded for Ricky Davis and Mark Blunt. Or is it not that true?
It's not. No, yeah, that's similar, but no, it is. So traded by the Boston Celtics with Marcus Banks, Mark Blunt, Ricky Davis, Justin Reed, and a 2006 second-round pick to the Timberwolves for Dwayne Jones, Olowokandi, Wally Szczerbiak, and then the draft pick that would later become Johnny Flynn.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's I do remember that. There's a lot of weird Celtics trades during.
Yeah, they're odd fellas, but that's how Peck got there. Okay.
All right. Well,
I'm glad we've done this.
I'm glad we cleared that up. That was a very important point that all of our readers, I'm sure, or listeners. Why do I keep saying readers tonight? All of our listeners would greatly be interested in. So. On that note, I think we're going to take a little break, and we're going to talk about Jay Will's Miami and Orlando years. All right, we're back, and Jason Williams is now a member of the Miami Heat. And he and Shaq are apparently good pals, which is one reason why Williams ended up in Miami. And there's a SI article from October of 2005, a couple months after the trade, where wondering how everyone's going to coexist there. Particularly Shaq with Antoine Walker, who likes to shoot a lot, in case you hadn't known, and it's interesting because this is a really heavily Shaq focused piece. When I think of Shaq obviously like being important in those years in Miami, but I think of him as sort of being along the ride, where Wade was really the number one guy. But I don't think that wasn't really the case until the actual finals themselves.
Yeah, no, and that is absolutely true. Yeah, Dwayne Wade just became a sensation in those finals. But yeah, a lot of it was Shaq. I mean, it's hard to believe now because you sort of. The vivid memories aren't obviously the regular season games that the Miami Heat played. You remember the finals. I mean, the most notable finals, of Dwayne Wade, him taking over in the Dallas and the comeback and all that sort of stuff. So that's sort of why I get why people kind of think that. And I think that same way too, because I have a hard time believing that at any point it was just solely Shaq's team, but it was a huge deal when he went there. And obviously there's reasons why we don't remember that because, we don't remember like random regular season games. But yeah, I remember that being a sensation when he went there and being really the patriot or the reason why they were as successful as they were.
Yeah, and obviously Wade was still, really important even during that time. This was only his third season. Shaq's the veteran. I mean, it does make sense. But it just was like, oh yeah, that's kind of how it went. So, so the 05-06 season for the Heat, they're 52-30. They're basically an all-new team other than Wade, Shaq, Mourning, and Haslam. They get off to an 11-10 start. So Stan Van Gundy's out of there and Pat Riley is in. Williams, I kind of basically numbers-wise stays relatively close to his reliable Memphis self. A little bit less in usage, which makes sense given who he's playing with. Actually only plays 59 games because of injury that year, but has his best year ever shooting three-pointers, which I think we mentioned. And Gary Payton actually had a bigger role on that team than I sort of remembered during the regular season. Of course, he has a big playoff game. And as we mentioned before, Williams, kind of his big moment of, really his Heat career, and in particular this year, is in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the Pistons. Scored, I think he scored 10 shots in a row at one point, had 21 points, and in the series clinching game, which of course the previous year the Pistons had beaten the Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals, so it was a bit of revenge for the Heat, and they end up making through to the finals. They lose the first two games, but then they ride Dwayne Wade to beat the Mavericks in the NBA Finals, giving Jason Williams his first and only ring.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah,
he deserves a ring, Jason Williams, for all he's done for us.
He did, absolutely. Next season, the Heat were only 44-38. Wade played only 51 games. Shaq played in 40. They were swept in the first round by the Bulls. It's a sweep, so pretty emphatically. And it's interesting how quickly it all tumbled apart for the Heat. I mean, it really Shaq really only played 2 full seasons and 2 half seasons. Because he's traded the next year in 07-08, and they're the Heat are 15-67 that year, which is just like, Shaq is traded for Sean Marion, Wade's hurt again. Walker, I think he declined quite a bit he was actually pretty good in the 06 season, but he declined a lot in the 07 season. He gets traded for Ricky Davis and Mark Blount. And I mean, you look at the lineup of that 07 Miami team, like it's just not the 08 Miami team. It's not so good. And Williams,
they were an older team too, and that's sometimes that will happen as well when you just get. But it's shockingly
they
bad
got old. Really quick. It's just.
No, it's like snap. They had that series against the Bulls, and if you remember, that's like there's that famous gif of Alonzo Mourning just kind of like shaking his head or whatever, and they just got blown out by a Bulls team that was not very good. I mean, completely swept them, and that team was just a hustling bunch of young guys, that Bulls team, and that's sort of when you kind of realize, oh wait, these guys are really old, and it was like then everybody was just kind of it was over. It was right then and there. It was just done.
If I recall correctly, the same Bulls team beat them by 40 points on opening night.
Oh, that was that one. Yeah, it was like that's the gif is of Alonzo Mourning sitting on the bench, and you could see the little ticker. It's like 128 to 72 or something ridiculous. Yeah. And then Mourning's just like, oh man, it's over.
Yeah, right.
It's like we suck. Like we're done.
Yeah, I mean, Ricky Davis led the team in minutes that year with 2,900, and everyone, no one else had more than 2,000. So, they had Daquan Cook is playing a lot of minutes. Chris Quinn is playing a lot of minutes.
You can't have
young Dorrell Wright. Chris
Quinn cannot play that much.
Yeah. Marion was hurt.
Penny Hardaway, you see him?
Marion only played. That's right, Penny Hardaway. That was his
all the way down there.
Year. Yeah, 325 minutes. Marion didn't play that. He only played 16 games for them. I think he got hurt too after the trade. So, they had Marcus Banks there too. I guess he was involved in the Shaq trade. So it's So then Jay Will decides to sign with the Clippers in August of 2008, but then in September, about 7 weeks later, decides that he's going to retire and misses the entire season. Kind of a surprise. Later on, a year later, he decides to make a comeback with the Magic, and they sort of explain that he walked away from the contract because his wife had some complications when pregnant with her third child. He ended up sitting out the entire season. He tried to be reinstated in February. It required unanimous approval from the league's 30 teams, and it was voted down 24 teams to 6, which is sort of an interesting process. I never had heard about that before.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and I wonder why they wouldn't let him back in. Come on.
And they talk about Michael Heisley, long being fond of Williams, wanted him to come back to the Grizzlies, but then he decided he wanted to stay in Orlando. He'd been there for about a decade, and he could be near his family. And then there's a great quote. Let me tell you this, if I could go all the way back, I wouldn't do a damn thing different. I know I messed up here and there along the way, but those things I didn't do right helped me to become the person I am now. I guess it sums up him pretty well in right. So he has one strong year for actually really good Orlando team. This is the year after they went to the finals. They were 59-23. They fell to the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals in 6 games, but they destroyed the Bobcats and Hawks earlier in the playoff. And they had sort of they'd upgraded in talent, but sort of downgraded in chemistry. They had lost Hida Turkoglu, Courtney Lee, and Rafer Alston. Turkoglu signed like a crazy contract.
That was this insane Toronto contract that he got, and a lot of it was because of that finals year. He was unstoppable. I mean, the guy was just in the corner shooting. I mean, he's a big reason the Cavaliers couldn't beat Orlando was they had nobody to guard Hida Turkoglu because they put I think Anderson Varejao was chasing him around, and Hida was just having a field day running him around the corners and just killing him. So Toronto said, "Here, have all this money," and that I don't know if you remember that, but I think halfway through that Toronto year, they were like, "Please leave and never come back."
Exactly. Yeah,
we would like you to never come back ever.
And then they traded for Vince Carter and Ryan Anderson. They signed Brandon Bass and Matt Barnes. They matched an offer on Gortat that no one thought they'd match. It was like Dallas, was like, oh, they tried to steal Gortat and everyone thought they were going to be able to do it, and they were supposedly clever, and then they matched the offer, and it looked like they were going to be even better, but they were still really good, but not quite as good, obviously. So, and for whatever reason, even though Carter went back to his hometown, he didn't quite. I think he was still kind of in the transition from
he wasn't quite the reliable he was still kind of I want to have a huge usage rate and be the focal point of the offense.
Yeah,
versus
and he was still really good, but just not quite He definitely slipped that year a bit.
It was Phoenix that really was the time when he was like, you know what, look, I probably should just do this now. Now he's carved out a really, really awesome career, and I think he's a big part. We mentioned the Memphis Grizzlies before. I think he's a big part of why the Grizzlies are as good as they are this year.
Yeah.
He's been a lot of fun. He's been just a guy that's very interesting, the role he's sort of taken on and how few guys are kind of willing to do that. Right. Later in their career.
Yeah, how few stars are able to, guys who are number one options.
Notably Allen Iverson, everybody always mentions, how he just kind of went out of the league right away. And if you remember, teams wanted to sign him and they said, look, you just can't shoot, 30 times a game. And he went, well, nope, then I'm good.
Yeah. So,
but it's crazy to think, what would have happened, if Iverson came back, and then was sort of a different sort of player. But Vince Carter's carved out a nice.
Yeah, I mean, even you can sort of extrapolate that to Jason Williams a little bit. Even though he was not nearly the player that Iverson was, but toward the end of his career, he kind of did actually carve sort of an effective niche as a role player, a little bit, and obviously kind of went away from the flash. I mean, not that he ever shot as much as Iverson or was anywhere near the player of the star, but I mean, on a slightly or a much smaller scale, he did sort of be able to do that. So. Then his final year, he only played 25 games between Orlando and Memphis. Age started to catch up with him. He, got a little bit of a run in Memphis at the end to sort of, I guess, say goodbye there. But, kind of went out with a whimper. Although he still does, I guess he's played some in China. He's done some exhibition stuff and sort of, does at least some tours there to, and still sort of shows off some of the flashy moves there. So he's still, got a life in playing basketball.
There was did you watch that video? I think it was in October. I think they sent out just about a few months ago. That was him in it was like an Orlando Pro-Am, this rec league in Orlando that he's in.
I don't remember.
Oh, go watch it if you haven't. He's so good. I mean, it's him. It's Jason Williams being that against accountants or whatever. He's the same guy. He looks exactly the same. I mean, same amount of speed. I mean, relative to the guys he's on the court with. But no, it's pretty awesome. It's incredible.
There you go.
It's just him. I mean, the ultimate hey, who's? Oh God, they have Jason. Why do they have Jason Williams? Or you're playing against them. You tip off and you're like, is that Jason Williams on their team? And it's yep.
Nice.
He's like the live ringer that comes in, but no, he's and he talks a lot of crap in the video too, so it's pretty sweet.
Good deal. Well, I'll be watching that as soon as we're finished with the podcast. I know you have some stats and some fun facts for us.
Yes. So some are good, some are bad about Jason Williams, but a few things I wanted to tackle. He's one of 37 guys to average 6 or more assists in their rookie year, so decent kind of company there. And he's a guy who came in, as you mentioned, was just kind of a sensation right off the bat, and was given the keys, which a lot of young point guards as well don't necessarily get. Another thing he unfortunately did as a rookie is shoot a lot of 3-pointers. It did not do them very well. His 6.5 3-point attempts per game as a rookie are the most ever. The only guy who's anywhere near close, who's at I believe 6, is Damian Lillard. So all-time, Jason Williams is your all-time of every 3-point shooter that's ever the rookie of the year. Jason Williams has taken the most per game. So definitely interesting there. This is kind of the less so, but a lot of these names are interesting, and I wonder if there's sort of a bias towards or just an interesting thing with this one is Jason Williams is only one of 13 players to have started over 600 career games and have a lower only 13 players have a lower win shares per 48 than Williams, that have started relatively the same amount of games as Williams. So these are guys that start a lot but aren't any better than Jason Williams. And here's this list real quick. I want to see what your thoughts are on this. You have Kendall Gill, Juwan Howard, Latrell Sprewell, Glenn Robinson, Benoit Benjamin, Raymond Felton, Chuck Person, Steven Jackson, Gerald Wilkins, Herb Williams, Jim Jackson, and your boy and a member of the Atlanta Hawks, 2004-2005 Atlanta Hawks, Antoine Walker. What are your thoughts on that list?
First of all, thank you for that. And
yes.
That seems like a list of guys who, were regarded as maybe pretty good. Some of them are, but probably weren't, for the most part.
Right.
Who probably were like guys who put up a lot of points but weren't, particularly efficient at doing so.
I thought Juwan Howard was an interesting one, though. I thought he was better than...
Howard surprised me. Sprewell surprised me a little bit, too, because I always kind of regarded him as maybe a bit of a better player than Steve.
Yeah, I do wonder if the Juwan... But it is per 48, so I was wondering if the latter years of Juwan Howard, when he was just kind of like this 43-year-old guy that's just like, hey, it's going, but he barely played.
Yeah.
So I guess he couldn't. Yeah, the win shares per 48 wouldn't really affect him there. But yeah, everybody else kind of fits.
Yeah, Steven Jackson maybe surprised me a little bit. I guess defense is sort of some of his value, which of course wouldn't be really very well measured by that. It would be somewhat, but not. It's still. Most statistical measures just have a hard time measuring that. So everyone else. I'm sad to say because Jim Jackson was my favorite player when I was a kid. So, Ohio State guy. So, I
was just interested in the time period as well. I mean, all these guys are like.
It's true. Yeah, they are all.
With the exception, Benoit Benjamin might be a little bit out, but not barely. He still kind of had some crossover. But the rest of these guys are like.
Yeah,
mid-90s to mid-2000s.
Yeah. Benoit Benjamin, I think, was rookie in like 87 or so. So he's not that much. Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't think about that, but is it the consequence of just having a bigger league and more players?
I think that's it. These guys have to, because I sorted it by starts because I wanted to see guys that got a ton of starts. So I'm assuming that's it. Where in previous years. Jim Jackson might not have hung around nearly as long if there was only, X amount of teams, but the fact that there's 30, he gets, but that could be it. I wonder.
But Jim Jackson had a reputation of being a pretty good player.
Exactly. Yeah.
So most of these guys, at least for a while, were, maybe not Joe Wilkins, but everyone else, I think there was at least, had 2 or 3 years where they were like considered, pretty good and, were maybe even borderline considered all-star, because they're like maybe they're a candidate for being an all-star, that type of player. So that is
definitely interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. A few things I wanted to tackle here is a bit of what I thought was an unfair narrative about Jason Williams, and that was the fact that he was, this turnover machine, and that's one of the big things we when you read these articles about the Bibby trade, it's all the Kings are, they're getting rid of a guy who just throws it anywhere and doesn't know where he's throwing the ball, and he's just a turnover, here and there, and it's just a walking turnover. He really, when you add in pay, his per game numbers of turnovers are a lot, but of course you have to factor pace in for some of those things. They were getting a lot more possessions. They were doing a lot more. He was handling the ball more than other point guards. So I wanted to look at a few other things here. He's 373rd all time in turnovers per 36, which is not bad. That's pretty high. And then another interesting part was turnover percentage. He's 99th all time in turnover percentage. That's the percentage of possessions that end in a turnover. Again, not awful. And then what I thought was interesting is we talked about how he, later in his years, he became a much more controlled player. So I thought, okay, let me look at those first 5 years of his career when he was less controlled, when he was just kind of going around there. And he's barely in the top 100 over his first 5 of guys in their first 5 years with those amount of turnovers. He's 91st in that. So really not a guy that was particularly like all time a turnover machine in a lot of ways. So I thought that was interesting because you always kind of get that. And I'd like to do a little bit more work on that and look at, assists and point guards and that, all that other kind of stuff. But yeah, I thought that was interesting that he's not necessarily, as bad. And one more thing before we go, and Jared helped me out with this one, is he talked about his really bad combination of field goal percentage and 3 points. I'm going to look at at all-time guys who have shot worse in both field goal and 3 point than Jason Williams. There's only 5 guys here, and this is a who's who of great players as well. Vernon Maxwell, Jamal Tinsley, Eddie Griffin, Sebastian Telfair, and Ronnie Price are the only guys who have shot worse at both those things than Jason Williams. So.
Nice. Well, yeah, I mean, I think we've made a pretty convincing case that, the turnovers weren't really an issue. It was more just the shooting was.
He was not a good shooter.
Yeah, and he became an okay one as he, for a few years there, particularly in Memphis and Miami. But yeah,
And a few of the articles talked about too, and obviously the highlight videos aren't going to show this, but that one of the big issues was they'd be on like a fast break and he would just stop and take a 3, or like they would, there'd be a 2-on-1 and he would just stop and take a 3 or whatever. It was those sort of things that were the most maddening, less so than kind of the turnovers and stuff, because he wasn't. I mean, had a lot of turnovers, but had a lot of assists too. Yeah. So guy that it was really, I think, more and the bad defense, as we mentioned, the defense was horrible. So that did not.
You had some. A little bit of a kind of a comparison to Williams and Bibby that I thought.
Oh, yes, yeah. Let me. So luckily, Basketball Reference added a play-by-play data this year, and they've done a little bit more with that. So I wanted to look at the transition between Williams and Bibby from the last year with Williams on the Kings, and then the first year with Bibby to kind of look at a few different things. So we're talking 2000, 2001 Williams. He had 104 what they count as bad passes. The next year, Mike Bibby came in and had 80. And these are turnovers as a result of bad passes. So that's how they kind of calculated it here. And then another interesting thing I thought was, despite all those bad pass turnovers or whatever, 2000 to 2001 Jason Williams, he generated 907 points from assists, which is pretty good. The next year, Bibby, 893. So not a huge difference, but Williams actually tops them in points generated via the assists. So an interesting thought there. So that's where you get another idea that, look, it wasn't really how he was operating the team. It wasn't really his assists. It was probably just the fact that he was just a terrible defender and a horrible shooter, whereas Mike Bibby was, a competent defender, but a really good shooter. So.
Yeah.
So interesting.
So we got a late question kind of just, overall thoughts on Williams versus Bibby. Like, do you have any strong opinions on, which player had a stronger career, or which one you'd rather have if you were, if you were running a franchise, Got any hot Williams versus Bibby takes?
No, what's interesting about Bibby is that you get a guy like Williams who started out really hot and then fades a little bit, but then finds his footing a little bit later. Whereas I don't know if Mike Bibby ever did. I mean, he started out kind of just pretty hot, stayed hot for 10 years, but when he flamed out, it was over. But he was in the league a lot longer, played for a lot more teams. But man, the vivid memories of Mike Bibby on that Knicks team. Do you remember how awful he was then? It's just horrible.
Yeah, but on the Hawks too.
I'm sorry you had to watch that.
Yeah, I mean he did he did help us get to the playoffs for the first time. So I'll get
so there you go. So. Yeah, no, but Bibby, I mean, overall, I mean, the poignant thing is, obviously those Lakers series, Mike Bibby is the guy. I mean, he's the guy that they're relying on. That he's the big shot guy from those teams. When Weber goes down, he becomes the star of those Sacramento Kings, him and Peja. So it's hard to really say that Williams was in any way, more significant to the Kings or more significant overall, because I think overall, but I mean, Jason Williams got a ring, and rings are all that matter. So, from what I've heard, So I think it's Jason Williams is obviously the better player. No, but it's interesting. Yeah, I think Bibby I would probably rank quote unquote better than Williams, but it's an interesting debate for sure.
I'd definitely rather watch Williams without question.
Oh no, absolutely. Yeah. And there's nothing that exciting about Mike Bibby's game.
No, and it got worse as he got older. So. I mean, those Kings teams were fun even with him, but with Williams,
he shot 28% from the field with that Knicks team.
Yeah, that's.
How do you shoot 28% from the? 20% from 2-point.
He played 39.
20% from 2-point.
He played 57 minutes that year too. That's that was Mike Woodson, I would think.
I think that was.
Yeah.
Oh no, was that a late D'Antoni year or no? Was that the D'Antoni? I don't care anymore. You've killed it for me. Oh, it was both. It was the first half was D'Antoni, and the last half.
There we go.
So,
yes.
But that was D'Antoni just like sitting there and being like, I don't care. Let's do whatever.
All right, guys. Yeah. All right, and then I think the last thing.
He gave me Stephon Marbury. I have no will to live anymore. So.
The last thing we have to talk about is, of course, Jason Williams' tattoos, and I took this is straight from Wikipedia, so if it's inaccurate, I apologize, but I did not do that thorough of verification of Jason Williams' tattoos. But he has a panther on his right arm, a dragon on his left, an eye on his chest, and apparently he has the quote of "It's why I pass so good because I have a third eye."
Perfect.
In the 2001 season, he had a wolf holding a basketball on his arm, and he had White Boy tattooed across his knuckles. He also has his children's names on his forearms. So,
well, there you go.
There you go. You heard it here first. I don't know anything else on white chocolate. I mean the player, not the.
I have no more
because
thoughts.
I don't.
I especially have no more thoughts on the candy. But no, I think I'm out on the white chocolate stuff. I think it was a good recap and a fun career for a guy. And really, I just watch his highlight videos. There's like 4 or 5 on YouTube, and they have horrible music, but whatever. It's just amazing to see the stuff he does.
Someone make a great Jason Williams highlight video with good video quality and just not music, just like actual like the calls,
just not Eminem. Just anything but Eminem. Really, I will accept.
Wouldn't you rather hear the calls in the crowd? I mean, maybe you can have a little bit of music in the background, like softly, like if you really want to add, like okay, fine, or a little bit of music interspersed with the calls. But really, I want to hear the calls.
You're right. I agree.
All right. So just, just my 2 cents. All right. Well, thanks everyone for checking us out. We always appreciate it. You can find us at thepodiumgame.com, which is part of the Hardwood Paroxsym Basketball Network. You can find us on iTunes on the Hardwood Paroxsym podcast feed, of which we are part of many of a great group of podcasts that we are proud to be part of. You can follow us on Twitter at Over and Back NBA. We're at Facebook at the same name, and we have an overandbacknba.com.tumblr.com website that you can check out as well with links to our shows and a handful of other things. I don't know, I think that's about it. So
that is it for me. Yes.
All right.
Great episode. I enjoyed this.
All right. I enjoyed it as well. Thanks everyone for listening, and please visit us again soon.